it's time to try defying gravity. I think I'll try defying gravity, and you can't pull me down.
Can't I make you understand? You're having delusions of grandeur.
I'm through accepting limits, 'cause someone says they're so. Some things I cannot change, but till I try, I'll never know. Too long I've been afraid of losing love. I guess I've lost. Well, if that's love, it comes at much too high a cost. I'd sooner die defying gravity. Kiss me goodbye, I'm defying gravity, and you can't pull me down. It's me. So if you care to find me, look to the western sky. Has someone told me lately, everyone deserves a chance to fly. And if I'm flying so low, at least I'm flying free. To those who ground me, take a message back from me. Tell them how I am defying gravity. I'm a flying high, defying gravity, and soon I'll match the renown. And nobody in all of us, no wizard that there is or was, is ever gonna bring me down. I hope you're happy. Bring me
Hi, everybody. How are you? Welcome, welcome, welcome. I just want to preface that that dramatic song means that this session tonight is going to be just as dramatic and wonderful. But welcome, y'all, to this call tonight. I'm really excited to be here with you all to have this conversation around implicit bias. We're going to have a good time having some interactive conversation tonight. And so I'm looking forward to engaging with you all. My name is Jen Roberts, and I am the CEO of Verse Education Group. I help folks to think about their organizations in a way that makes our communities and our lives a little bit more fair. I'm a mother, a facilitator, and a social designer, and I wanted to put myself and my daughter on this photo so you can see that I'm also raising a young girl myself. So the things that we're talking about tonight are things that I'm also thinking about, not just as a facilitator, but also as a parent. We have a agenda today that I think will be pretty exciting for us, and I'm looking forward to engaging with all of you. We're going to start off just setting the tone for the night, and then we're going to start with some imagination, some guided imagination to think about what the world would look like if the world was as fair as we would want it to be for young girls. We'll have a quick mini lesson about understanding implicit bias, and then we'll have our first breakout group where you'll get to do some discussions around what implicit bias looks like from your perspective in your work with girls. And then I'll give you some practical tools and some practices that you can use to combat bias. We'll have our second breakout group where you'll get to practice changing some language around. And then we'll close out, do some reflection, and share how you can stay connected at the end of this session. We have lots of folks from Lean and Girls helping us in the chat tonight. So feel free to drop questions, to let them know what's going on. I will also be stopping multiple times throughout the session if you have questions. So feel free to have the chat going. We have folks that can hear you, listen to you, and get everything to me if necessary. So, the purpose of this session tonight is really for us to understand not only bias and its impacts, but also thinking about how we can be more aware of the bias that impacts young girls, and then how we can leave with some tangible tools that help us support the brilliance of young girls through combating that implicit bias and also helping them to push back against that bias themselves. And so, one of the ways that I think it is great to start any of these discussions is to start with a little bit of imagination. I think that when we are able to think about what we want the world to look like ideally, it helps us bring some of those practices back into the present. And so, we're going to start with a quick imagination workshop exercise for you. And I want you to, if you have the ability to, you can close your eyes or you can just take your gaze away from the screen. And I want you to imagine a world where young girls are fully seen and heard, where they're valued for who they are, where there's no harmful stereotypes, no gendered expectations. And as you're imagining that world, I want you to think about how that world looks and feels and sounds. What opportunities do the girls in this world have? And how do the adults in this world show up for them? So I want you to take just a minute or so and imagine that world for yourself. And then in the comments, you can drop a few ideas and then we'll have a couple of folks share out. So take a moment and imagine that world for yourself. Okay. Does anybody have any thoughts about what this world would look like and sound like and feel like if we had a space where women and girls were valued for who they are? And you're welcome to raise your hand or just come off of mute and we'll hear a little bit of what you're thinking, or you can type some things in the chat and we'll share those out. I see in the chat that menstruation products wouldn't be considered a luxury. Absolutely. Any other thoughts? Girls' voices are centered. Absolutely. Thank you, Emily. Other thoughts? Spaces are inclusive for all types of girls, colorful and supportive. Thank you, Molly. And the world would look and feel limitless. Absolutely. And I have time for a little bit of maybe a little bit more. Anybody else want to come off mute and hear your voice? Okay. Well, I am excited for us to think about what a world like that could be and how our work with young girls could help start some of those things right now in the spaces and in the communities in which we're working with girls. Um, and so, our lesson today, what we're thinking about today and what we're talking about today is implicit bias. And so, we want to think about the ways that implicit bias has impacted young girls. It does impact young girls, and the ways that you, as a person who supports them, can help to teach them how to combat bias themselves, but also create the space and environment that will that combats that bias as well. And so when we look at the definition of implicit bias, we're saying that these are things that are unconscious attitudes or stereotypes that impact our actions, our understanding, and our decisions. And a lot of times we don't even know that we have these biases because the surroundings that we have, whether through media, the messages we receive, pretty much from birth, are ingrained in us. So this is like the water that we swim in. And so unless we are willing to unlearn and be extremely aware of the things that are showing up in the way that women and girls are talked about, a lot of times we will perpetuate those biases without knowing. And so the idea here is for us to learn a little bit more about what those biases are so that we can recognize them and disrupt them when we see them. And so here are some of the things that you should know about implicit bias in young girls. So one, when we think about bias and how it impacts girls of color, is that Black and Latino girls are often seen as less innocent and they tend to face harsher discipline. And so those are things that we should be aware of when we are in school systems, when we are in community groups, if we are noticing that girls of color are being looked at differently, then those are ways that times that we could be standing up to impact and combat that bias. Also, we notice that girls sometimes face gendered expectations extremely early. So this is when we're looking at folks expecting for girls to be more girly in their presentation, maybe not like the types of subjects that we think that boys should like, and it often impacts their interest in certain subjects, particularly in the STEM fields. And then bias shows up in behavior as well, where girls are often expected to be nice and quiet, and that can often limit their ability to be seen as leaders. Or if their leadership style looks different, then it can be that can be a way that they are impacted as well. And so we want to be aware of some of these ways that bias shows up, creeps up into the way that girls are seen, so that we can start to combat that bias ourselves. And so we're going to start this conversation off with our first breakout group. We're going to have two breakout groups tonight. And in this first one, we just want to have you have some time to reflect on your own experiences with implicit bias, the way you've seen implicit bias show up in your work with young girls, and maybe some of the ways that you've already worked to combat that. If you're still learning and you're still in a space of figuring things out, that's okay. That's what this space is for. And so hopefully some of the folks that are in the breakout groups with you will have things that they can share with you about their experiences as well. But we want to see and have you reflect a little bit on what you're noticing so far. And so you're going to have about 8 minutes in this first set of breakout groups, and you're going to be in groups of about 3 to 5. And I want you to think about a few questions. And you may not get to all of these. You can pick what questions really resonate for you and start there. So where are you seeing bias show up in the work environments that you are in now with girls? And how might these biases influence the way that girls see themselves or see their future? And then what do you think are some of the small shifts that we can make in our daily practice to counter these biases? You might already be making some of these small shifts. So if you are, being able to share some of those best practices that you're seeing work would also be great to share in this group as well. I would love for you all to come back from this group with 1 or 2 takeaways that you might have to share with the rest of the groups. And then we'll discuss a little bit after this breakout group returns. Are there any questions about what you'll do in this first set of breakout groups? All right, folks, are we ready to open up the rooms? Hey, folks, welcome back. I'll wait for folks to get back in from our groups. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had some great conversations in your breakout groups. I would love to hear from a few folks from your group. What are 1 or 2 takeaways that you had from your group around this topic about what you're seeing around implicit bias right now, how you think it impacts the girls that you're working with, and what are some actionable things that you're doing. So if anybody would like to come off mute, you can either raise your hand by going down to the bottom of your screen and hitting the reactions button and raising your hand so that we know that you're interested in speaking. Or you can type some of your ideas in the chat as well, though we would really love to hear your voice. So, one or two takeaways that you've gotten from your group that you'd like to share?
Hi, I'm Jazz.
Hey, Jess.
I noticed in my group that we talked about the biases that we notice, amongst the people we work with or the people that might interact with our scholars or the girls.
Mhm.
And so I noticed that like it was a conversation of like the cultural biases
Mm,
and the gender biases. Like on my end, I'm working with young girls that look like me. So most of the things that come up are going to be cultural biases. And so I'm not saying there was nothing wrong what was being shared in the group, but it's like things that I would have never thought about. Like I work with all girls, so there are no boys here. But it was just very interesting. Like those are real things too, but polar opposite than what I've experienced with the girls or what I see them encounter.
yeah. And I think that's such the beauty of us all coming together today and you being able to hear some other experiences that maybe your girls in your context aren't experiencing with you. But I wonder if it might open up some discussion for you with your girls about what they're experiencing when they're not in your environment, if they're seeing some of these same things and where the intersectionality might play out, where it's both then cultural and gendered when they're not in the presence of your all girl environment. So I'm glad you got to hear some of that as well. Were
Mm.
you all able to share some different ideas or different suggestions of ways that you're pushing back against that in your space?
We didn't get to that point, but I'm assuming that we all would address it because it was the examples that we talked about was problematic to us all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you for being the first one to share tonight. I know sometimes it's hard to break the ice, so thank you, Jazz.
No problem.
Anybody else want to share about what came up in their groups?
I'd like to share.
Hi,
Is that
Tina.
okay?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, we had a lovely conversation. Thank you. Yeah, we were just sort of noted just the influence of the media, and the role models that are out there, in our governments and things like that, what's happening in our political situations and things, and how important it is, to call out things that are not right. Yeah, and educating, from a school environment, like, yeah, when we see these things, getting alumni into that have been very successful in the STEM areas and things to talk. Yeah, so that was sort of really interesting, just the big impact that the media has, social media and, television, all sorts of things. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. The media definitely has a play here. And especially if our students are really into social media, then we know that they're getting bombarded by messages even more than maybe some of us were when we were younger. And so it's good that
Mhm.
you're noticing that. And also, I love the suggestion of alumni coming in, particularly those that are in the STEM fields, to be good role models and examples. And we're going to share a little bit later about some tips and ways that you can be combating bias, and that's absolutely one of them. So I'm glad that that came up for you all.
Mm.
Maybe time for one more, and then I'll share what I see in the chat. Anybody else want to share out
Jen,
loud?
I'm gonna share something.
Okay.
Hi, this is Manu.
Yes.
Um, everything that both the ladies have been saying is right, and we I think had a similar discussion about color and gender, and then sometimes the girls being very hard to anybody of a different color joining a group. But I just feel that because I'm in the after school industry, and one of the things I see is you are hiding behind social media, and the layer becomes so thick because the phones are listening to us. And if I'm looking for a product, suddenly I'll see it on Instagram. Same goes for the post. So if I'm just checking on a certain topic, and I think the pile is so tall of where they're hiding, we need to find a way to break and get rid of that pile and have the girls come out, and not follow those same posts on Instagram or Snapchat or whatever, or TikTok all the time. And
Mm.
I didn't have the realization till I heard, Julius talking about social media, that we need to break that first.
Yeah, that algorithm will do its number on you. And if our kids are online quite a bit, then you're right. They start to create what the algorithm gives them by what they look at and spend time on. And if that isn't something that is encouraging of them, then you put yourself in a rabbit hole that's really hard for us to get them out of. And so that's such a great point, Manu. I see in the chat also just issues with male faculty or even other women faculty who might not have the same values or same mission, and how to push back against folks that you are in relationship with and in community with your girls, and what it looks like to have those conversations too. And then adultism, I see that from Emily coming up, and absolutely adultifying girls, but then also not reminding ourselves that they're still learning, and that is our duty to help and share with them and teach them what it looks like to be a powerful girl that is embracing all of who they are as well. So these are all really, really great things that have come up in conversation. And I think you'll see in our next section, we're going to talk about some practical tips and solutions, and you'll see some of what you have said, and then hopefully a few other things that you can be either reminded of or add to your toolkit to help you combat bias when you see it show up. So we have 5 different tools and tips that we want to share with you tonight that we hope will you can add into your own toolkit and help your girls learn about as well. And so one thing that we want to be doing is teaching girls about the biases they will face. And this kind of connects to what you were saying, Manu, about helping girls recognize what they're being fed, and so that they can be aware of what those stereotypes look like, aware when those things are speaking in ways that we don't want them to speak about themselves, and they can push back against those stereotypes. And what's really important for the adults in their lives is to learn about these gender stereotypes. And I would say also learning about the intersections of both gender and race and ethnicity as well, so that you can show them how those things compound. And then inviting girls to notice them when they appear, talk to you about them, and learn how to have a dialogue with them to challenge those stereotypes, what that looks like to challenge it within their groups with other young girls, and what that looks like to challenge it when they hear adults speak in a certain way. What does that look like for them as well? So teaching girls about the biases they face are one of the practices and tools that we could be using and putting in our toolkit. The second one we want to share with you is just normalizing leadership and voice. So girls are told from a very, very young age that sometimes they're too loud, or they're too opinionated, or they're too bossy, or they're unlikable. And so it can make them think that the skills that they have, the leadership skills that they have, are not valuable. And so we want to continue to give girls roles of responsibility, to make space for the ways that they express, the many ways they express themselves, and showing them the multiple ways that they can show up as leaders, and then praise them for their confidence and assertiveness. And so I know I'm raising a teenager right now, and sometimes I have to remind myself when she's assertive, even with me, that I have to encourage that. Even if I'm helping her figure out how and when to do it, I still need to encourage that assertiveness in her, encourage that leadership in her. And so we can be doing that as well, so that they don't take on those thoughts of being either too emotional or too dramatic or too loud, or even some of the ones that might come off as quote unquote too quiet. What do the various types of leadership look like, and how can you make space for all of them, is what we want to be considering, and as you're working with the girls as well. The third tip we have is that language matters. So one of the best ways that we can combat implicit bias is about when we're like flipping the language and making sure we're checking the language that we're using. And so adults usually inadvertently expose our students to gender biases by saying some things about like girly interests, or commenting negatively about women in media. Some of you already brought some of that up in the chat just now. And so one of the ways that we can combat those messages are to openly praise our girls for a wide range of interests and strengths. So if we find ourselves constantly praising our girls for the same things, really taking the time to think about the other things that they are good at and praising them for those things as well. To use growth-oriented language. And when we catch ourselves or our colleagues using language that doesn't show the expansiveness of what girls can be and encourage their abilities, that we are flipping that language and sharing ways that we can use language that shows them the breadth of who they can be as girls. And then we want to be exposing girls to positive role models. So we heard Julie say this as an example when she shared. We want to make sure that we are are defying stereotypes by having our girls see other women in positions of leadership that they might be interested in, and exposing them to things that they might not have considered. And so we want to think about the media that we show to them, the role models, the images that they see, and make sure those are reflecting the diversity of all the girls that we work with. And because what Manu said is so true with the social media, we have to work double time really to show and combat what they might be experiencing on all the time in social media. And so we know that exposing girls to these diverse role models, it just helps them learn to challenge those stereotypes as well. It works so well with the first point we gave about teaching them their own ways to combat stereotypes. So bringing in those role models, whether actual people coming in or just thinking about the media and the images that you're showing the girls is so important. And then finally, interrupting bias in real time. So practicing yourself how to consistently interrupt bias comments. So when we are seeing that people are thinking only certain people can lead a particular activity, being able to say something like, actually, let's make sure everybody has a chance to lead this activity. And so finding ways to constantly make folks check their own biases in front of girls as an example, so they can see what that looks like from the adults in their lives and begin to practice it themselves. We are going to drop a link to these 5 practices in the chat for you so that you can have them for yourselves. You can hang them up where you work, remind yourself of some of the things that you might want to be practicing for yourself and some of the things you might want your girls to practice as well. Are there any questions that are coming up after sharing about these?
Jen, can I ask you a question if that's okay? Still have time.
Absolutely.
When I did my first leadership, the Lean In Girls camp, there was two extremes. There are girls who don't say a word, and it's easy. I don't know, easy, but in comparison, it's easier for me to talk to them and bring out the confidence. But then there's another spectrum of girls who found a path of making looking different, dressing up differently, which are also not accepted that easily into the normal group. What is the right balance of telling them why when they're saying that I nobody accepts me for who I am, and because they dress differently? And I have a daughter who's an artist, and one time she had colored her hair turquoise. So I'm like, okay, and she went to SCAD, and she goes, everybody's like me over there in SCAD. I'm like, yeah, but not in high school. So I had trouble as a mother to telling her why people are not accepting you because of that. So what are the practical tips or right thing to say in such a situation when there are girls who just go all out and shaving their eyebrows and dressing up differently?
Honestly, I think one of the tool that I think is the most helpful in that situation is the role models piece. And that might take a little bit more work on the adults' part. But I think when we can show the girls who are doing all of these things that feel really outside the box, that there are plenty of people, other adults who are also outside of the box. And even better if you can show them other youth who are outside of the box that are really successful or confident. I think that helps. I think a lot of times when our girls are that way, if they don't see anybody else that is like that, then they really see that there's no space for them. Just like the quiet girls might feel like there's no space for them. And I don't know if there's a balance as much as there is just a little bit it might be a little bit more difficult to find some of those examples, but I think that's even more reason why we should be looking for them. And so whether that's your daughter being an example for them, whether some of her friends coming in asking those girls what are the things they're interested in, and finding some of the people, adults that are interested in those same things too, to show them what their path was and how they might not have always fit in or always did everything that everyone else did. And even if it's not dressing differently or acting differently, showing them examples of folks who didn't take traditional pathways, so people who did things in a different way than maybe typically is shown, can also be a really great way to do that. So I really think the role models piece, especially for adolescent girls, tends to be one of the best ways to combat this. They just have to see themselves in somebody else. A lot of times we talk about if you can't see it, you can't be it. And I think that even when girls are starting to be something, if they don't see that it's okay to be that thing, they might try to stop themselves from being that way. And so the role model piece, I think, is really important on that one. I hope that answered your question. Anybody else have a question before we move forward? Okay, so you have the resource link there for you with all of these. I hope that's helpful for you. And then I'll share at the end some other ways that you can keep this conversation going so that we can give you some other support as you're working on this as well. So we're going to move into our second breakout group. And this time we're going to practice a little bit with one of these skills. So we talked about in the practices that language matters, that it's really important for us to consider the things that we say. And when we hear other folks saying things that have biased language, how we can, in the moment, flip that language and share with them the more appropriate, affirming, supportive language that they can use. So you're going to get a link in the chat before this breakout group. The link is going to ask you to make a copy of this document so that you can type into it. And then you're going to be in small groups of 2 to 3. And this document is going to ask you, show some examples of biased language. And it is going to ask you to work with your group to change that language around. And there are no perfect answers here, so we should have lots of different options for what we might would say in return. But I think it's a great way for us to have some things in our back pocket, because I don't know about you, but when some of these things come up or some things are said, you feel sometimes put on the spot and don't know exactly what to say in the moment. You'll think later, oh, I should have said, or I should have done, or maybe if I had been thinking a little bit quicker. But I think practices like this help us have some things right in our back pocket that we can pull out when some of these typical biases show up. So you'll have about 8 minutes or so in this group to work. Take your time. If one or two of these like really get the conversation going, don't feel rushed to complete them all just to get through them. I'd rather you have a good discussion. And then when we come back together, we'll share a couple of examples that you have as well. Any questions about that? Okay, I'll see you after you come back from this breakout group.
I could sell that.
Hey, welcome back. I hear some laughter. That means it was a good conversation. Love that. Anybody want to share anything that came up in their group, whether you want to share one of your examples or just something that resonated with you from your discussion around shifting our language?
I can share. I was in a group with Denise, and we had some great conversation around just shifting the perspective about we went all over like the questions and everything like that, but then specifically the second page when it said boys will be boys. We both work with predominantly girls and gender expansive youth. And so we framed it towards for just girls. And it was girls are dramatic. And that was a common phrase for us. And it was just shifting the perspective of, yes, some are dramatic, and that's a framework that we're trying to get out of, but also looking at it as maybe they're going through something, and this is the way that they've been shown, and this is the only way they know how to express that.
Mhm.
So having that perspective and then giving that perspective to the other youth to be a little bit more receptive and open to share with each other.
I love that. So not just changing the language, but also helping them build some empathy about how different folks show up so that they can recognize and value those differences, even if they don't understand them. It's great. Other thoughts or other things that came up in your discussion?
In a group with Jennifer and Amber, and we had a really great discussion. And I'm not going to share necessarily what we talked about, but something that it reminded me of. I had been facilitating Lean In Girls for middle schoolers and would have some of my high school students that were leadership fellows. I don't know why I air quoted it. They were from my center help facilitate. And we were talking about bias. And it's so great when you teach this because one of my high school students had this epiphany about the word basic. And she goes, Dr. K, because she's, like the Stanley Cup Lululemon wearing, which there's nothing wrong with that, right? But it's like, she says, everybody calls me basic, and we're in Columbus, so the Ohio State University football, blah, blah, blah. And she goes, but nobody ever calls boys and men on Saturdays who all wear the same jersey, who all do the same thing. And I'm like, well, this is a gender bias. And like, it was like her head almost exploded, right? But just even being able to, I think is really empowering when you can center them to see that for themselves and to be able to flip it and just reframe it as a question. Like, so what is ladylike? And so what is, and like, oh, are boys not also, or what have you? So
Yeah.
we're not basic team, or everybody is basic, or I'll mute myself now. Okay.
Thank you, Emily. That was great. I love the question too, like just getting them to the point where they question everything, like because the discovery and the aha moments are the best places to start. So I love that example so much. Thank you for sharing that. We have given you this form. I hope that you share some of this or work on some of this with the other folks that you are in community with. It can be really great just to have that conversation about what can we do differently, come up with your own statements that you hear, maybe think of some of the ones you hear from the staff at your schools and try to practice flipping those around. So I really appreciate you all engaging in this conversation. So I know this was fast, but we have come to the end of our hour. Okay, go ahead, Amber.
Sorry, I just saw the last slide you were showing had the filled in portion. Are
Yes,
you sharing that?
we weren't, but we can, we can send it out.
Okay,
Okay, yeah, we can do that.
thank you.
So I want to say thank you for joining tonight. I know that this was a quick session, but I hope that you were able to get some takeaways and have some things that you can revisit. There's a couple things I want to leave you with. I want you to take a moment and do a little bit of reflection and just think about one thing that you are walking away with from today's session, and you can jot it down for yourself or just think about it. And then one thing you're going to do differently after today to create more affirming spaces for girls. And either you can put either your reflection or your commitment in the chat if you'd like to share. And while you're doing that, I'm going to actually pass it to Emily to talk to you about how you can stay connected, because we are going to be keeping this conversation going on the new and improved and relaunched Slack channel for you all. So I'm going to pass it over to Emily so she can talk a little bit about that. I'm going to stop sharing.